Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. That music means it's time for the Hillsdale Dialogue. It's our weekly journey into big topics and big picture. And the person you see there, if you're watching on the Salem News Channel, is Dr. Paul Rahe, professor of history and the lead professor, I think, in the Graduate School of Civilization, Western Civilization. Dr. Rahe, it's so good to see you again. How are you?
I'm just fine. I have a book coming out in 2 weeks, so I'm about as happy as can be.
What is the name of the book?
It's called Sparta's Sicilian Proxy War. And it's about the Sicilian expedition in ancient Greece from a Spartan perspective. And when writing it, at least in the last stages, I thought a lot about proxy wars, including Korea for the Russians, Vietnam for the Russians, Afghanistan the first round for us, Afghanistan the second round for the Pakistanis, Iraq for the Syrians and the Iranians, and, of course, Ukraine.
For us.
So it's yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Rahe, that
Ukraine
is so fascinating.
Yeah.
The HillsdaleDialogue.com is usually not about current events, but today it is. Dr. Arnn is indisposed, and you're so kind to fill in for him because I always love talking to you. You are a scholar of republics. You are a scholar of the West. You're a scholar of history, and you're a scholar of ancient Greece. You and Victor Davis Hanson are the two people I know that know the most about Sparta and things like that. What does the Sicilian campaign, well, tell people what it is first. We're in the middle of the Peloponnesian War here.
It's an optional war for the Athenians. They are theoretically at peace with Sparta, but it's a kind of armed peace. And they're hungry, and they want more tribute, and they want glory. And Alcibiades sells them on going 800 miles overseas, which is a very long supply line for that period, and to try to conquer Sicily, starting with Syracuse. And Alcibiades, who has been driven out of Athens, ends up at Sparta, and he advises the Spartans to intervene on behalf of the Syracusans. And they intervene by sending one man, Gylippus, and that's enough. He puts steel into the Syracusans, and without any other expenditure of manpower and materials, the Spartans are able to do untold damage to the Athenians that opens up the way for their defeat in the Peloponnesian War.
That is the bleeding theory of proxy war. Bleed your opponent on a field in which you are not bleeding, and they will be weakened. What's so interesting about this, anyone in the audience who saw the latest Indiana Jones movie, and it's really, I don't know if you've seen it, Professor, but it's set in that civil, it's set on the Athenian attack on Syracuse. Did you know that?
No, I haven't seen it. Good gosh.
Yeah, I know. It's completely wild. It's completely wild. All right, let me go and tell people about the Hillsdale Dialogue. All things Hillsdale are found at hillsdale.edu. Professor Rahe has been there for how many years? 15 years, Professor? You've been teaching for 15 years?
16. I'm in my 17th year.
And what are your courses this year?
Well, right now I'm teaching, as I do every fall, Western Heritage, which is for freshmen. And we start with Hammurabi's Law Code and we end with Locke's Second Treatise. It's a boot camp of a course. I'm teaching a graduate course called Thucydides and the Peloponnesian War with about one faculty member is sitting in, and then there's two people auditing, and then I've got about 9 graduate students taking it. And it's great fun. and I don't have to do any preparation for it because I've written all these books and they're in my mind. So,
has anyone written about the Syracusan campaign before in modern time? I know that we've got some Peloponnesian war books out there by, among others, VDH and yourself, but I don't know if anyone's focused specifically on that campaign.
Well, some years ago, a man named Peter Green wrote a book about it. Now, that's 40, 50 years ago. Donald Kagan spends a chunk of one of his 4 volumes on it. And there are Italians who've written on it. In fact, there's a 3-volume Italian book that's pretty good, but otherwise not. And my book is the first book to be dedicated directly to it since Peter Green wrote. And but the other thing is no one has ever written about it from a Spartan angle. And from one perspective,
Spartan Sicilian Proxy.
Sicilian Proxy. Yeah, that's it. Spartan Sicilian Proxy War, the grand strategy of classical Sparta, 418 to 413 BC.
All right, so tell people,
and there's a reason.
2,500 years ago, what does that have to do with the Ukraine conflict today? What are the lessons for today?
Well, the lesson is when you have an enduring strategic rivalry or when you have a nuclear standoff, when the struggle cannot take place directly between the 2 adversaries, either because one's a land power and the other's a sea power, or because there's a nuclear standoff, this is a way one of the powers can bleed the other. And it was very frequent during the Cold War. I mean, the Russians had at us in Korea and Vietnam. We had at them in Afghanistan. Ordinarily, the impact is short term. Maybe it lasts 10, 15 years. It hits morale. It hits prestige. It hits resources. And they bounce back. Sometimes it brings down a political regime. The collapse of the Soviet Union is not solely caused by their disaster in Afghanistan, but that played a major role in breaking their morale and their belief that communism was the way to the future. Other things played a role, too.
Dr. Rahe, I just finished reading the bio of Ike, which details how Eisenhower's firm conviction was democracies fight fiercely, but not for long. You've got to win. You've got to show them what you're intending to do. Is that proven out by your Sparta Athens research?
Well, keep in mind, ancient democracies are very different from modern democracies. Modern democracies are commercial in character, and therefore they prefer peace to war. Ancient democracies were martial in character. They depended on tribute. And so war is something that they welcome. If you look at the history of the 5th century, Athens is almost always at war. Sparta, which is an oligarchy, agrarian, based upon the subjection of helots and the control of land, they're almost always at peace, even though we think of them as warlike, and rightly so. But Athens, oh my gosh, they're in a way out of control. And the Sicilian expedition was idiocy, given the presence of the Spartan threat. The Spartans are sitting there waiting for the Athenians to do something stupid. And boy, did they do it.
Now, Dr. Rahe, you have to refresh my memory, because it's been a while since I've read Thucydides. What did the Athenians, why did they go to Syracuse? That's a long way in any war, across the water in triremes or whatever they're called. Why did they do that?
Yep. For the same reason Sir Edmund Hillary climbed Everest, because it was there. I mean, Syracuse is large. It is wealthy. Sicily in general is a breadbasket. And the Athenians crave adventure. Look, ever since Marathon and Salamis, they've thought very highly of themselves. In 460, they went into Egypt to try to take it away from the Persians. And they sent 200 triremes, meaning 40,000 men, at least a third of them Athenians, and they lost everything. So that they're adventurous. They glory, Achilles, and they think very, very highly of themselves, and with some reason. I mean, their accomplishments vis-a-vis Persia are just breathtaking.
And they had Alcibiades, too, who was very, very much a phenomenal general. When we come back, we're going to go from there to Ukraine, and then we're going to go to the American presidential race, because this is what I wanted to talk to Dr. Rahe about, are the strains on our republic and whether or not he thinks they're significant and enduring. So don't go anywhere, America, except to hillsdale.edu. All of the Hillsdale Dialogues, all of my long conversations with Dr. Arnn about World War I and other current events and every other book, and all the way back to where we are with Dr. Rahe in this segment. They're all collected at hillsdale.edu, as are all the online courses. You can sign up for Imprimis, the free newsletter as well. Stay tuned. I'll be right back with Dr. Rahe on the Hillsdale Dialogue here on the Hugh Hewitt Show. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Dr. Paul Rahe, professor of history at Hillsdale College, the lead professor of history up there. Dr. Rahe, Joe Biden is 80 years old, and his age is becoming an issue. Konrad Adenauer might have been 80. They called him Der Alt, the old man. I don't know. Disraeli was pretty old when he went to the Congress of Berlin, and Bismarck said, Der Alt Juden, the old Jew. That is the man. He was being very complimentary of the Prime Minister of Great Britain when he said that, because Disraeli was running circles around people. Age really doesn't tell you anything, but do democracies usually depend upon very old men?
No. I mean, if you look at the history of the American presidency, if you leave aside Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, it's been younger people in their 40s, their 50s, and their 60s, at the height of their powers, and with a capacity to change their minds, if you know what I mean. They weren't old dogs, and they often tried new tricks. So this is most unusual, and by and large, I think it's not a good thing. There are exceptional people who, at advanced age, are all there, but not everyone at advanced age is all there. And I say this as someone who's 74 myself.
Well, I believe that people can be quite able, well into their 80s and 90s, in the ability to take in new information on a selective basis and to respond to new conditions on a selective basis. I'm not sure anyone in their 80s and 90s ought to be called upon to do that every day when lives are in the balance. That's my genuine concern about the president now.
I agree. But look, he was already in trouble before he was elected, and they kept him out of the public eye because he was going to stumble all over himself. And he was never the brightest bulb. I mean, Ted Kennedy once described him as the stupidest man in the Senate. And if you think about it, until they handed him South Carolina in the 2020 election, he'd never won a presidential primary. He'd run again and again. He's a highly spirited man. Good Lord. I mean, to keep going and keep going and keep going. But no, he's not competent.
And Secretary Gates, the former Secretary of Defense under both Republican and Democrat, George W. Bush brought him in, President Obama kept him, said President Biden's been wrong about everything for the past 40 years. His decision-making skills are not likely to improve in his ninth decade, are they?
No. It's not going to happen. And you can see the disasters he can lead us into, given our withdrawal from Afghanistan. That was really very telling. So, and I personally believe we would not have helped the Ukrainians had that not been such a disaster. He could not afford a second humiliation.
So the closest parallel I come to is when Reagan had to deal with successive Soviets who kept dying. Leonid Brezhnev, followed by, I think it was Andropov, followed by Chernenko. I might have the order wrong. And that's what happens with a gerontocracy, right? Instability and collapse.
Yeah, right. And inattention. And what happens is their advisors begin to actually run the show. Think of Woodrow Wilson after he had his stroke. His wife was running the country. And Wilson wasn't that old, but he was not well. I mean, he was very much not well. So it's and look, we are entering a period of very considerable danger. In my opinion, we haven't had a really good president since Reagan. And what I mean by that is that until Donald Trump, they all averted their gaze from the question of China. And that got us entangled with China economically and in 1,000 other ways. And it's turning out to be a disaster.
Well, I think W was about the perfect president for 9/11, Professor Rahe, because of the ability to rally the country. A hugely erroneous decision, not deceitful, but erroneous on Iraq, about which I was, in complete agreement. I'm not yelling at W about this. But the question becomes right now, and we're going to talk about this after the break, the stresses in the country, are they best served by someone who's been around? And this is not RD. The stresses in the country, are they best served by a new face or by a reliable old hand?
I think a new face. In my opinion, it would be very good if the Republicans won decisively, and there was someone who was intent on eliminating the polarization and on dialing things back, but also on getting certain things done. One of the problems we have now is our justice system has been corrupted.
Now, hold on. We're going to go to the break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the stresses on the American Republic. Dr. Rahe is an expert on republics from the beginning, all right? So he knows republics. We're going to talk about the stresses on republics and democracy when we come back with Dr. Paul Rahe. It's the Hillsdale Dialogue. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Stay tuned.
Hey, it's Scott Bertram, and I've got a challenge for you today. Become a better educated American citizen. And to help you do just that, we at Hillsdale College have our free online courses available for all who wish to learn. Our challenge? Take just one of our courses. There are so many to choose from. You can discover the beauty of the Bible and the Genesis story, study the writings of C.S. Lewis, or explore the true meaning of America in Constitution 101. We have dozens more to choose from, and all these self-paced free courses feature Hillsdale faculty and scholars, many you've heard on this podcast. So visit hillsdale.edu/course, COURSE, and pick one of the more than 30 free Hillsdale courses. I hope you'll accept my challenge. Pick whichever course you like and become a more educated citizen today. Go to hillsdale.edu/course, COURSE. That's hillsdale.edu/course.
Welcome back, America. It's this week's Hillsdale Dialogue with one of my favorite faculty members up at Hillsdale, Dr. Paul Rahe. He's been teaching there for 14 years. He is a marvelous expert on all things ancient and modern. And Dr. Rahe, I'm going to give you the floor because imagine that we're a bunch of freshmen, because we are generally all freshmen, and you have to explain to them what happens to democracies in crisis. And you and I lived through the 60s. You were on Yale's campus, I think, during the Vietnam convulsions. I've always told people, this is not the 60s. It's not even close. But I'm beginning to wonder about the fraying edges of the American polity. Are you worried, and why?
I'm worried, and I'm particularly worried because of what's happening in the courts. And what I have in mind here is prosecutorial misconduct, and there's a lot of it going on. And what that does is it ups the stakes. In the books that I've been writing about Sparta, Athens looms large, and one of the things that brings Athens down is a turn in political practice in the 420s that extends right down to 404, in which things are fought out in the courts rather than in the assembly. And instead of ostracizing someone for 10 years in such a way that they could come back and play a role in Athenian politics, you execute them. Well, when things get that hot, those who do not want to be executed will put their own safety above the public interest. And one of the reasons for the disaster in Sicily is the Athenian general in command there, Nicias, who ends up sort of holding the bag, is not willing to make a decision that would put himself in danger and bring the whole thing back. So they get in trouble, and then they send a second expedition. And when they've sent the second expedition, they don't have the resources left to defend their empire against Sparta. And it is Nicias's decision. He doesn't dare go back home because they'll kill him, even though he's been a very popular and very successful general in the past.
That's lawfare.
This business,
ancient. That's lawfare BC. Lawfare today is 4 indictments and threatened confinement. And I do believe it's a terrible, terrible turn. Have we ever done this in America? You've been teaching American history for a long time. Have we ever done anything remotely like 2 impeachment followed by 4 indictments? Of course, there's never been a president like Donald Trump. But have we ever responded this way, ever?
The only time we've responded in anything like this way is in the wake of the Civil War with regard to some of the Southern leaders, depriving them of their citizenship. And if you think about that, that was a real insurrection, not a demonstration that got out of hand. No, we have not. And it's very good that we have not. It should be possible to lose and not lose your livelihood.
Yeah, I've been talking with Dr. Arnn about the situation in Great Britain in 1914, the spring and the summer. And they were on the brink of civil war in Great Britain in 1914. People don't remember that, but the Irish question was going to divide Ireland, and they're going to have to send troops, and the Greens were going to take up arms against Ulster, and it was going to be a nightmare. And then the catastrophe struck. But normally republics don't fall to that level unless there is a long simmering domestic dispute over which there can be no reconcile. That's the United States experiment with slavery in its midst. It didn't work. Is there anything else in your experience that would suggest that going to lawfare makes sense for any country?
No. Going to lawfare is extremely dangerous because it makes people desperate. And desperate people engage in desperate measures. So, and, we've been creeping up on this ever since the impeachment of Richard Nixon. The politics has gotten hotter. Nixon is impeached and driven from office. There's an attempt to impeach Reagan and drive him from office. Clinton, and of course, Trump twice.
And now there's an impeachment inquiry in the House about Joe Biden. And I think it's ill-advised generally to do that this late in an election cycle. But is it now just the rules of the game, Dr. Rahe?
Well, it seems to be. I mean, the door was opened and it's tit for tat and going back and forth. And the other thing is, the presidency has become much more important in the course of your lifetime and my lifetime. The presidency has always been very important with regard to foreign policy. But Congress has been eclipsed. If you go back to the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, the people who chaired committees in the Senate and in the House, they were barons. And the reason is the power of the purse. All right. In the struggle between Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton, Congress gave up the power of the purse. They really don't do budgets anymore. They vote on the president's budget. and they don't break it up into committees and look at it in fine detail. And the consequence is Congress doesn't really matter much anymore. No one's afraid of them. And if they start an investigation, what happens is the executive branch throws everything in the way of that investigation they can. So to get to the bottom of the question whether Joe Biden was on the take will require a paneling and impeachment committee in the House of Representatives. That shouldn't be the case.
You're a student of the Roman Republic, the late Roman Republic. There were two parties, basically, the people and the elite, and they constantly escalated their tactics and their stakes. They went to lawfare. I remember Cicero actually prosecuted the governor of Sicily, like your book, 400 years later. Do you think that's what's happening in real time, or are we just going through a bad patch like 1968?
I think it's happening in real time. This is far worse than the 60s. They were a mess, but look, what happened in the 60s was a quarrel within the Democratic Party, a rebellion by the young people against Lyndon Baines Johnson, and a battle royal within that party, which took place for the most part on university campuses. Now what you have is a relatively unified Democratic Party and a relatively unified Republican Party. And the Democratic Party has changed character. It's lockstep. I have political science graduate students, and I had a dinner with our PhD students about, a year and a half ago. And I asked them to name 5 Democratic senators other than Elizabeth Warren, who I went to high school with, Schumer, Bernie, and Klobuchar, people who'd been very much in the news. They could not name 5 Democratic senators. They're automatons. They vote with the party. When you and I were younger, Democratic senators were making a fuss within their own party. And they were making trouble for Democratic presidents as well as Republican presidents.
None of them knew about Chris Coons or Chris Murphy or Angus King or any of the sort of center-left Democrats?
Nope. They didn't know the names. These people are unimportant. And it's one of the reasons why, if Joe Biden gets pushed out, which I think will happen, who could they nominate?
Chris Coons.
I think Gavin Newsom.
Maybe Gavin Newsom, Chris Coons.
Chris Coons, I think not.
It would have to take the president coming up and saying, I'm handpicking Chris Coons to take over my legacy, and the Democrats not wanting to nominate the vice president because she's a loser. And I don't see how anyone comes to the conclusion other than she's a stone cold loser. She will lose 40 states, like I think Biden will. Before we go to break, last question before break, do you think convicted and confined Donald Trump beats Joe Biden a year from now plus 2 months, given what the trajectory of the president's infirmity is, Dr. Rahe? Okay,
let me say, I have an opinion, and my opinion is almost worthless. My experience is pundits' opinions about these matters are their opinions. That's it. Yes, I think he'd win it. You turn him into a martyr. You abuse the judicial process in ways that are obvious to too many people, he will win. And that's what I've told people. Biden, I am a convicted and confined Donald Trump will beat Joe Biden on his current trajectory simply because the American people will not be led by an invisible hand, and they will conclude that. I'll be right back with Dr. Paul Rahe. Don't go anywhere unless you're on the coast of Maine. Then you might want to drive inland. I really don't know, but I do want to remind all of you out there that Dr. Paul Rahe's book is called Sparta's Proxy War, and it's all about the Syracusan campaign, and I cannot wait to read it. Paul Rahe is a magnificent writer.
Do you believe in our founders' vision for America? That our republic will only survive if we are an educated and informed people who know our rights and duties. Since 1844, Hillsdale College has sought to educate all who wish to learn about these timeless principles of self-government. For more than 50 years, the college has worked to spread that mission by sending Imprimis to millions of Americans. Imprimis features some of the best speeches given at Hillsdale events, and now an audio version of the popular Speech Digest is available in a new podcast of the same name. And, like the print publication, Imprimis, the podcast, is always free. Listen to the best arguments from speakers such as Chris Rufo, Molly Hemingway, Mark Stein, and Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn, read by Hillsdale students. Subscribe today to listen to Imprimis at podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio.
Welcome back, America. I'm having a serious conversation with a serious man, Dr. Paul Rahe, whose new book on Sparta will be coming out, and I'll be sure to tell people about it here on the Hillsdale Dialogue, hillsdale.edu, for all of the dialogues, all of the courses, all of the great things that Hillsdale offers, including the application if you want to go. Dr. Rahe, we've heard a lot about threats to democracy. We've seen the rise of parties that were previously splinter parties all across the West. We see stresses in the United States. I am something of an unfailing optimist, or at least hopeful. I never believe bad things can happen. What do you think is the worst case plausible scenario in the United States?
That Donald Trump gets convicted in a trial in a venue where it's perfectly clear he can't get a fair trial. And that could easily happen in New York or in Georgia or in Washington, D.C., and that he gets elected president at the same time. I wish that he were off the stage. He's an impressive man in certain ways. He was, as president, Michael Walsh just spoke of his supine last year in which he let them walk all over him. And I think that's really true. I wish he were off the stage. I wish that Governor DeSantis were going to be the Republican nominee, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. I wish Joe Biden were off the stage. And I wish that there were a genuine moderate Democrat running, but that's not going to happen either. So I think we're in for trouble.
But trouble, I want to focus on the trouble, Dr. Rahe, because I'm in Switzerland. I don't endorse anyone, I just report. What do you mean by trouble? Because I can remember 1968, not very well. You know, I'm not even in junior high when the riots break out in 67, but I think I'm in seventh grade when MLK and RFK are assassinated, and things look a little bit wild. I don't think we're going there. That's why I always say to people, we've been in a lot, and there were 500,000 Americans deployed in Vietnam, and 1,000 were getting killed or wounded every week. I just don't think we're there.
We're not there, but we are more divided and more bitterly divided than we were then. You know, the opposition to the Vietnam War was a minority, and they were very active and they were very violent, but the country was against them. Here, there's the bitterness is like nothing I've ever seen.
Even in Michigan?
The conduct
in Michigan?
Yes, in Michigan. Yes, there's a great deal of bitterness in Michigan.
Doctor, I interrupt only to tell you, I went to my 45th Harvard reunion, and that was deeply polarized. It was very annoying to me because politics outside of the Beltway, I don't want to do politics. I want to talk about kids and what they're doing and grandkids and stuff like that. But it was polarized and it was bitter. And I thought that's just because it's Harvard. You're saying it's actually everywhere, and that would trouble me greatly.
It runs through families. I think it's very, very bad. And I think it perfectly possible that one side or the other won't accept the results of the next election. So and see, what makes this especially bad is the chickens are coming home to roost with regard to our 30 years of averting our gaze from the danger posed by China.
I agree with that. But Dr. Rahe, I believe that the Constitution is very strong. I want to make sure you get an answer to this. I think the Constitution can endure anything because it's got systems built in for it to endure, the Supreme Court being primary among them. Do you think the Constitution endures anything?
You know, the Constitution depends upon the character of the judges and the character of the prosecutors. And there is a systematic attempt underway to undermine the Constitution. There is a systematic attack, for example, on the First Amendment. And time and again, going back quite a number of years, from the left, there's been the view that certain kinds of speech are unacceptable. And boy, has that broadened in character. Disagreeing with someone now is a form of hate speech. So, the character of our ruling order, of the people who hold high office, their self-restraint matters. The Constitution is meant to save us from our passions. It guarantees, for example, double deliberation in the House and the Senate. It makes use of the self-importance of congressmen and senators to make them take that seriously. It makes use of the desire of a president to be remembered in history in a positive way. And he plays the third role because of the presidential veto in that deliberation.
We're going to have to talk more about this in the future, Dr. Rahe, because I'm still an optimist, but boy, it's not warm and fuzzy when Dr. Paul Rahe is not the optimist. I'm looking forward to seeing Spartan Sicilian Proxy War when it comes out. Thank you for filling in today, Dr. Rahe. Always appreciate it very, very much. That's it for the Hillsdale Dialogue. That's it for this week. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Arlie. Thank you, Dwayne. I'll be back on Monday on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.